So in the last video, you got an introduction to the idea of like what a narrator is in the story, and then what does point of view mean as it relates to the narrator. And then for the rest of this presentation, we're going to talk about the 4 different types of point of view. And you'll notice that I picked like a really radical, super tubular slide background that all the kids are going to be into, because I know that you guys are into, generally speaking, like exploding graffiti and silhouetted skateboarders and hot colors. So enjoy. All right, so the person telling the story, we call them the narrator. It's not the author, it's the narrator. The author wrote the story, the author's a real person. It's not always like the author took part in the story, though, for reals. The narrator is who we call the person or thing telling us the story. And point of view refers to the way in which the narrator tells the story. So now we're going to get into the different types of point of view. First person point of view is when the narrator takes part in the story. So the story is told from one person's point of view, yeah, and the narrator takes part in the story. Like they're actually involved in the action. So the example would be if you're reading a story and it's like, I walked to the store today. I bought some cheese. I know the story is super boring. If you see the word I a whole bunch in the story, usually that means first person. Now you have to read it carefully. I mean, if it's just a character in the stories talking about themselves, it might not be first person. But if the entire story is told to you from the point of view of a person or thing that's actually taking part in the story, that's first person. Generally speaking, in first person, the reader, us, only knows what's going on in the mind of the person who's telling the story. Usually we can't tell what other characters are thinking. Now there might be like modifications to that, or there might be an exception to that, but usually that's how it works. We don't know what the other characters are thinking, we only know what the narrator is thinking. Okay, so second person. Second person is kind of a weird way to tell a story, and it doesn't happen that often. It's really uncommon. The story is told by referring to the reader as you. It's like the narrator's talking directly to us the whole time. It's really not a good way to write like at school. A lot of like people in middle school, this is a big thing we're working on, is getting rid of the word you in your writing, just because it's kind of a weird way to write. It kind of sounds like you assume your audience like knows all the things you know. It just doesn't really work. In a story, it's really rare. So once in a while, writers will use this for an effect, like to kind of make it stand out, because it's kind of a rule that says like if you're writing a story, you wouldn't really write in second person. So if a writer uses second person, they're kind of breaking a rule to try to make something stand out to you probably. And the example would be like this. If it was written like, you walk in the room, you notice all the lights are off. A cold breeze blows across the back of your neck, giving you goosebumps. A hairy monster pops out of the closet. You jump and say, oh, a hairy monster. That would be second person because you hear you a whole bunch. It's a weird way to write. It's not something you really want to use, and it's not something you'll see a whole bunch. But it is called second person. And now here's these last two. These are the tricky ones because we have third person, and there's 2 types of third person. The first type of third person is third person limited. And in this case, the story is told by talking about the characters. The narrator isn't taking part in the story. It's like they're just somehow observing things happening. It's like they're sitting in a little drone up in the sky and just kind of like telling us what's going on as things happen. Now the deal with limited. Limited means while we hear about all these different characters, as a readers, we only know the thoughts of one of the main characters. We just hear about the actions of others. So the limited part means we're limited to only knowing the thoughts of one character. So the example would be like, Feldmort walked into the 7-Eleven, thoughts of sugary goodness dancing through his head. Okay, so we know his thoughts. The store clerk looked at him suspiciously, edging his hand toward the panic button underneath the counter. We might be able to infer what the store clerk's thoughts are based on their actions, but we don't know for sure. No one told us directly what the store clerk's thoughts are. So we're just observing the store clerk, but we know this character's thoughts for sure. So we're limited to just one character's thoughts in third person limited. Third person omniscient. Okay, so the hardest part about this one is remembering this word omniscient. Omniscient has this word, part of the word called omni. Omni means like everything. So omni, like omni, would mean everything. So omniscient, and then shint has to do with like viewing. So viewing everything or knowing everything. Omniscient means all knowing. And then again, the tricky part about this is omniscient, third person omniscient, is when we know for sure the thoughts of at least more than one of the characters. Now, there might be 20 characters, but if we know 2 or more of their thoughts for sure, that makes it omniscient. It's limited when we only know one character's thoughts. It's omniscient if we know more than one character's thoughts. Okay? So the story is told by talking about the characters. Same deal, because it's third person. We're still hearing it, the story as if the narrator is just like sitting up in the sky observing what's going on and telling us about it. But the part that's omniscient is that the readers know the thoughts of more than one of the characters, even if there's only one main character. So the example would be like Mortimer walked past Feldspar, thinking what an attractive girl she was. Feldspar looked right back at Mortimer, but in her head, she imagined herself barfing all over the floor. So in this case, we know both the thoughts of Mortimer and Feldspar. That makes it omniscient. Omniscient means we know more than one character's thoughts. So to finish this assignment, you're going to answer 4 questions. You're going to tell me in your words what's first person view, what's second person view, what's third limited, and what's third omniscient. And I'll actually post a link to this PowerPoint up here so you can go review those definitions too.